Hi guys, thanks for coming. Um, I'm John. Really quick, I'll just touch on who I am. Security consulting, Stratum Security, alumni of Champlain College and Herkimer Community College. I really like cybersecurity, privacy, piracy, copyright law. Type of person who likes reading joint analysis responses and arrest warrants, court documents, stuff like that. So I'm going to talk about the Silkroad and Russ Ulbricht versus the US. That's the main case of the Silkroad. And before I start, I just want to make a disclaimer that there's going to be a lot of text on this. So I know it says too long to read, but you're going to have to read something. Before we jump in, some really notable technologies that I'm just going to mention. I think most of you guys should know what they are. The internet. The Onion Router, or Tor as it's commonly known, the postal services, US Post Office, and Bitcoin. If anyone doesn't know one of those, you want to raise your hand and I can explain it, or I think we're good to go. Okay.
Explain the internet.
So what is the Silkroad? It was a marketplace. It was accessible from 2011 to 2013. Supposedly, according to the government, it sold about $1.2 billion worth of drugs and other goods. Some of the other stuff, hacking services, fake documentation, guns. According to chat logs, they were approached to sell human body parts, which DPR, the head of it, said it's fine as long as both parties are agreeing to sell their organ. And so as long as it's they want to sell their organ, it's okay. And they also had cyanide for a little while on it. So it wasn't just drugs, it was all kinds of stuff. And how it made so much money was it used a vendor system. So you would sign up and every sale you made, the Silkroad would take a cut. These are the main players involved. You don't really need to know their faces, but I figured why not? You could see a lot of these people are some type of government agent. It was a very long and broad investigation across many agencies, but I'm not really going to touch on each of them. You'll see them, I'll mention them, but if you want me to flip back so you can see who I'm talking about, what they look like, just let me know. So who knew that Ross Ulbricht supposedly ran this website? Before it was launched and shortly after, there was maybe 3 people who actually knew. Julia V, who's this picture, who knew, he showed her actually, the facility he ran it out of, and told her basically up to the point where he ran it. Richard Bates, which was a friend of his, who he reached out anonymously for help with PHP code. And then Erica, Julia's friend, that was informed when they had a fight and Julia went to see her friend and they smoked a joint and she told her, hey, by the way, my boyfriend runs this $1 billion drug website. So knowing that, seeing all these authorities and these people knew, do you guys have an idea how he was caught? Was it Julia, was it Richard, was it Erica, was it the authorities, one of his staff, or maybe something else? Keep that in mind. So in the early days, Ross was in college. He was a master's student, while Julia was an undergrad student. He was in the Libertarian Club, which makes sense because he has a lot of libertarian views. And he started development on this site in 2009. It didn't launch until 2011, so 2 years he spent making it. A little before, maybe 1 or 2 days before it was launched, he posted on a Bitcoin forum about a drug marketplace, and on Shroomery, which is a popular site for magic mushrooms. Of course, at 4:20 p.m. he posted these under the handle Altoid, advertising a new site. You can buy mushrooms and heroin and all kinds of good stuff. That's good to note because it is why he was eventually caught. Initially, he didn't know how he would get people to trust the site. How can I get people to sell their drugs on it? So he took it in his own hands and he grew magic mushrooms actually himself before the site launched, so that he had something on it when it did launch. If you guys have not heard, his handle, which I mentioned on that people page, was Dread Pirate Roberts. That's a reference to The Princess Bride, a book and a movie. The main idea behind it is that if I call you DPR, I could pass that name down, and so that DPR lives forever. And that was the concept from the movie that really captured him. And I'll explain later who gave him that idea. And then I also have a quote from the final court appeal because, you know, technically he claims he was not DPR. He already handed the site over, and that was his defense, was that he abandoned his interest in the site. You know, the guy who was running it smelled that the government was on his tracks, so he said, hey, Ross, can you help me out really quick? And got him blamed for it. When he was arrested, there's a lot of evidence, and a lot of this evidence is gonna really make you question his defense. So again, there's a lot of text, but I'll just go through it as quick as I can. When he was caught red-handed, logged on to the mastermind page or the admin panel of this website, and also signed into the staff Tor chat as Dread Pirate Roberts. This was in a public library in San Francisco, so you know he was caught red-handed, you could say. On his computer, they found a PGP key, which was used to sign all of the messages that the lead administrator and then once took on the persona of DPR used to post on this site. So that's pretty damning as well, because the PGP key never changed throughout the existence of this site, even though he stopped running it, you know, after a few months. He also had instructions on accessing the staff Tor chat. Thousands of pages of chat logs. As it turns out, Tor chat by default logs, and he had no idea that over the course of these 2 years, it was logging everything that he was typing in it. He also had detailed journal entries of himself maintaining the site, lists that tracked ideas to add to the site and possible, you know, giveaways, stuff like that. A backup of the Silkroad database, spreadsheets cataloging both all the infrastructure related and all the assets related to the Silkroad, and $18 million worth of Bitcoin on a private wallet on his computer. The interesting part about that stuff is his encryption was incorrectly configured, and that's why the government was able to access these. If he used proper encryption, you know, these thousands of pages of chat logs and journal entries, they should have been encrypted and, you know, null, but they weren't. Some other stuff I found interesting, they claim is evidence from the arrest. I think it's pushing it. You know, they found logs in the chat that he was going to be traveling, and he told his staff members in October 30th, 2011, hey, I'm going to be traveling soon. And connecting to his personal Gmail, he saw, oh, he bought a ticket for November 15th, 2011. And they claim that's proof that he is the same person. Another instance, he put photos on his Facebook, his personal Facebook, of Thailand in 2012, and they have logs of DPR in a Tor chat in January of 2012 saying, hey, I'm going to Thailand, and I'm there now, and it's great, and I want to go to the beaches and the jungles. And they said, look, this guy's in beaches and jungles in his new Thailand pictures on Facebook. It's the same person, obviously. And then also, a little side note, his laptop's now on display in a museum, actually in DC now. So seeing those evidence, you know, they found on his computer, you know, does anyone question that Ross is DPR? The other interesting, really big note about this case, it's the first case that I've ever heard of such, I guess, federal agents going rogue. Both of them, there was 2 agents that ended up going rogue, and they went separately. They weren't together. They didn't plan this together. They didn't know the other one was also breaking the law, but they both did. And I'll just kind of break that down because I think that's probably the most interesting part about this case. So one day, Knob, who is the undercover agent, DEA, Carl Force, messaged in the staff chat, because he was undercover as a staff member of this site, saying, hey, I really want a kilo of cocaine. Do you know anyone? You know, obviously the head of the site did, so he said, yeah, I do. You know, go to Chronic Pain house, and I'll give you the address, and he'll have the kilo of cocaine for you, and then you can distribute it as you will. So they said, great, that's awesome. So, you know, they set up a raid to raid this guy's house, Chronic Pain. He turned out to be Curtis Green. He lives in Utah. They staked out in front of his house while one agent undercover delivered the kilo. And they were really confused because initially Curtis came out of his house, he looked at the package, you know, looked around, threw it in the trash, and went back inside. And they were like, what, he needs to bring it inside. Like, we can't raid his house. So we don't understand. So about around an hour later, they actually ended up coming back out. He ended up taking the packages and bringing it inside. And so then at that point, they raided his house. And if you saw, he was the person in the bottom right. So, he was a family man. He immediately turned when he was arrested and said, I'll do whatever I can to help you guys catch this guy. He gave him his username and his password to the Silkroad, and he was fairly high up in the staff. So it turns out that his account would let you do things like change users' passwords for vendors and also access their Bitcoin wallets on the site. So he could take coins out, put Bitcoins in on these vendors' site or on their accounts, which is a big access control issue in my opinion. And this is a quote, I couldn't find it in the arrest warrant, but I know one of the agents who were investigating did say this, is that they felt when they arrested him, they didn't want DPR to know, because they felt like he knew always, he always had a way. So instead of bringing him to the police station to book Curtis Green when they arrested him, they brought him to the Marriott in Salt Lake City, without their superiors knowing. And they immediately started to interrogate him, to help us find him, tell us everything you know, blah, 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 blah. While Carl Force was doing this, the other head agent in charge, Sean Bridges of the Secret Service, who helped this raid, went on Curtis Green's computer in front of Curtis Green as they were interrogating him and actually siphoned $350,000 of Bitcoin from vendors and put it into his own personal wallet. Because from his understanding, Bitcoin is truly anonymous and untraceable. This was without Carl Force knowing, Bridges acted on his own accord. But that's the first case of a rogue agent, and it's a Secret Service agent, which I've never heard of a case of a Secret Service agent doing something like that. So he siphons the money, and Knob, aka DEA agent, is saying, let's give Green a rest, let me check my laptop, let me go on to my, undercover duty as the staff moderator of the Silkroad. So he took his laptop out, he signs into his Tor chat, and he says, what's up, DPR, how are you doing, my captain? And DPR says, hey, that guy, Chronic Pain, he stole $350,000 of Bitcoin. And Carl Force was under the impression, well, he must have had some trigger that when we took his laptop, it did something and put money in something so that he could escape. So Carl Force believed that, Green did this. So they started to interrogate him, tell us how you did it, show us the money, blah, 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 blah. DPR said, I want the money back and I'll do whatever it takes. And you're trusted, I trust you, my DE agent, Knob. Can you rough him up? Can you get the money back for me? So Knob shows the Secret Service agent, and they both agreed, well, we have no choice. We have to torture him. We have to beat him up. So they took him into the bathroom, they tied him up, they started dunking him in the bathtub, they started to beat him with the stuff around in this hotel bathroom, and then they started sending pictures. And they did that because, they said it needed to look real. DPR got the pictures. He said, wow, that's great, but I still didn't get the money back because, Curtis Green, he didn't have the money, he didn't steal it, the Secret Service agent did. So he said, that's not enough. So he went to his right-hand man, VJ or Variety Jones, and he said, I don't know what to do, man. I want my, my $350,000 back, and I want him to pay for what he did. So VJ says, well, I know a guy in the Hells Angels. I could ask him if maybe, they maybe do a hit for us. It should be around $80,000. To DPR, that's pocket change. So he says, all right, here you go, and sends it to him. Shortly after that, they actually had to fake his assassination, which they used, they said spaghetti sauce to fake his blood, and they sent a picture, and DPR was under the impression that he had this guy killed. That actually never happened. Post this whole fiasco, Knob, or the DA agent, realized, hey, it would be really profitable for me to sell information to this guy. So he made a new account and started to modify his logs as, an undercover agent. He'd send everything he was doing over. So once in a while he'd start putting, I had a technical difficulty for 30 minutes. And in that 30 minutes, he was actually sending a PGP encrypted message with information from the investigation, which, granted, is how Ross stayed ahead of the authorities for so long. By the time Nob, or the DEA agent, was caught, he ended up amassing about $870,000 worth of Bitcoin, which he doesn't have access to anymore. So not just one agent, but two went rogue in this. Not just one, but two, went against the law, and it did not equal fruit of the poisonous tree, which I found to be absolutely insane. So how was he caught? Operation security. So what happened was this IRS agent who was put on the case maybe 2 years after they started investigating it was Googling, and he decided to sort by the oldest list, or the oldest hits. And he found a posting for help with certain functionality of this anonymous drug site that, he can't say the name of it, but it should be life-changing, and he really needs help for it. And this person who posted it was under the handle of Altoid. Interesting. So using that Google query and that post on this forum, the IRS agent requested the emails associated with this account on this forum, and the email was frosty@frosty.com. It should be a dead end. However, the forum ended up having the original email that he used to register, which was rossulbricht@gmail.com. Yeah, that's a... So, given this was months before the site launched, but that's pretty damning. At that point, he subpoenaed the IPs that hit this Gmail account from Google, which Google happily complied, gave that to him, and using that, they were able to pinpoint him to an IP address, both his location and the IP that he was connecting from. At that point, they deployed a pen register and a track and trace device. Track and trace devices are the incoming traffic, and pen registers are the outgoing traffic. From that point, they said, hey, look, there's a few MAC addresses or a few devices that are connected. That's probably his laptop, but let's get one for that. So they did the same thing, a pen register and a track and trace order on his MAC address. Now all you need for this is a attorney to sign off on it, one of the DAs to sign off on it. You don't need a judge's signature for this. You don't need
Hey John, when you say his router, this is like in his house or whatever?
Yep. So I'm assuming they went through the ISP, but yeah, crazy. So from that point, they had it on his computer. They were seeing, exactly what he was doing, and they could see clearly that his computer was connecting and had incoming from this Silkroad server named Frosty. And I'll mention how they got the IP of that server earlier, because remember, this is a Tor site.
So was the IRS and the DEA working together at this point, or were they separate?
So they were all under the same umbrella, but they were not fond of talking to each other. They said, okay, this guy, IRS agent is on point in this part of the investigation, and DEA is here, and Homeland Security is over here. But no, they weren't really working together per se. Depending on which agency it was, they could look at the other files. Like the DEA agent who sold information, he could see the files and the investigation going on. But no, they weren't in like that. The Homeland Security agent, he was in Chicago. One of them was in Baltimore. So they were all over the country. So no, they did not work together like that. It wasn't until Curtis Green's raid, really, that Secret Service, the DEA, they did that together. And from that point on, basically, they were all kind of working together. But the Homeland Security agent himself, he had to go to the judge and say, hey, I want to investigate this, even though there was already 6 other investigations going on. So yeah, no, they were not working together like that, unsurprisingly. So after they saw he was connecting to the Silkroad main server, 2 weeks later, he was arrested. The site was seized. That's actually an actual screenshot if you visited it with the actual URL. So why is this such a crazy thing? It doesn't sound crazy. They found his IP, they got his router, they got his home laptop. I'm not going to read this all, but basically there's a thing called the third-party doctrine from the Smith versus Maryland case, and that was a phone, and they said, look, without a warrant, you can see what phone numbers you're dialing on the phone and which numbers are coming in. That's it. You can't see if you guys connected, if they talked, what they talked about, how long it was, anything like that, just the phone numbers. What that equates to in our time in the digital age is the dates, the times, the IP addresses, the identity of the source, the durations, the ports that it was transmitted over, any TCP data, and any other electronic communication. That's not equal in my mind, but according to this case law, that is, so just keep that in mind that, the number you call is equal to everything you do over the internet. Current status of this case, Ross William Ulbricht, he was found guilty of counts 2 and 4 and all others. He was charged with a total of 7, although they did try to charge him with murder. But it turns out all 5 of the murders he tried to commit, or he paid someone to commit, were not committed.
Good help is hard to find.
At least as far as they know, none of the murders were committed. What's really interesting about the charges he was brought upon him was one of them, count 4, is the kingpin statute, which really you see a lot in drug cartels, not in people who make websites. And that carries a minimum of 20 years in jail and maximum of life, unless you can prove that they had someone killed or murdered someone, and then it's death. That's the minimum. I didn't even know we had charges like that in this country, but that's crazy. And he was found guilty, but he was not found guilty of having someone murdered or murdering someone, so he wasn't given death. They also imposed a forfeiture of $184 million. Representing the amount that he allegedly profited. So if you did the math, it was a $1.8 billion site. He got about $200 million from the drug transactions.
Where did the trial take place? What state?
I'm just not sure. I would say it's Maryland, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And the most current status, the Supreme Court, the highest level, recently denied his appeal. So he's stuck for life with no chance of parole. That's it.
I guess we shouldn't do that.
No, I wouldn't suggest that. This just some. This is some trivia. So this is a bunch of stuff I found really interesting, but didn't really fit into any of the other slides. So this, bear with me. It kind of goes from the beginning to the end, to the beginning to the end. But this is just some interesting facts. At one point, the administrator of the site, DPR, started to voice his libertarian ideals. You should be able to put what you want in your body, and you should be able to do what you want with your body, and the government can't tell you that. This was with an interview with a Gawker journalist who reached out via, the forum for this site. In response, Senator Chuck Schumer demanded the site be shut down. That was what I found interesting. The site was there beforehand, but since he was very passionate about it, now it's too much. The server Frosty, they nicknamed it, was in Iceland, and that's the server that was running the Silkroad. And it was confiscated, but the people in Iceland, the company, forgot to give them the encryption key, or the decryption key, which ended up being given to them a few weeks later. But at first they were like, what are we going to do? We can't crack the encryption, we're screwed. Turns out the key is try to crack this NSA, a reference to Snowden. How they were able to determine what the IP address of this Tor server was the FBI agent Chris Tarbell, who's pretty well known for his cybercrime investigations, leveraged a vulnerability in the capture system that was maybe for a few hours available, and using that vulnerability, which has not been disclosed, in fear that, and he argues that he won't be able to use that in further investigations if he does disclose it in court. He was able to determine the actual IP of the server, and it was patched within 2 hours, he said. Another interesting note, which people brought forward, saying, "Hey, you hacked the server, you hacked this company in Iceland, you can't do that." But his response is, hacking into a foreign server for investigative purposes is not against the law in this country. That's another very interesting point I found in this case. A side note, Tarbell also led the LulzSec investigation, which was a few years before this, including the raid on Jeremy Hammond, which involved the SWAT team, and that marked the first time a computer arrest utilized the SWAT team. So Chris Tarbell is not someone to joke with. Also, Hammond responded to his raid with threatening his loved one's life, the agent's loved ones, and that also happened again in this case. In total, I mentioned this, Ross paid for 5 murders, however, none have been confirmed to have occurred. In most cases, it seems that his right-hand man, Variety Jones, actually scammed him out of the money, which is basically the only case where he did do that, because they spoke all the time, every day, and he did really look out for Ross. But I guess when it came to him, he was happy to just pocket the money. Variety Jones, Roger Thomas Clark, was known as Mongoose on other drug forums. So if you guys are frequent of drug forums, I'm sure you guys know him. I never heard of it, but I guess he has a bit of a mythical status. He's very famous over the internet. And VJ was also the person that said, hey, lead administrator, you should change your name to Drug Pirate Roberts because, once one goes away, the other one comes, and that should be your great defense when you get arrested. And DPR said, wow, that's a great idea. I'll say it wasn't me, and they'll let me go.
Has Clark been arrested? Or?
Yeah, so he was arrested. He was, oh man, where was it? I want to say Thailand. He was in a prison. And he was actually next to the guy who was arrested for Alpha Bay, who committed suicide. So they're trying to see if there's a connection between that. But yes, he was a while afterwards, maybe 6 months afterwards. But yeah, he was arrested. But ultimately because of this, because this guy, he's been on drug forums for 20 years, but somehow, he got involved in the wrong thing. So as I mentioned, the FBI agent's wife and children were threatened by Silkroad staff and vendors post Ross's arrest. And this is from a book, so, take it with a grain of salt, but supposedly his wife carried a gun around their house in New York City because of this, and to this day still does, because of how scared she was of being hurt. The Homeland Security agent, who ended up being the Golden Star, because this Homeland Security agent didn't go rogue and was basically the only person that could speak in court and say, hey, we didn't mess with evidence, I promise, look, I didn't break the law. But at one point he ordered 18 drugs off the Silk Road, all different kinds. Tried to see, how many are getting back to the postal services, because how this case started was off one pill. One pill he found and said, this doesn't make sense. Why is someone sending one pill? Turns out it was a free sample. So he tried ordering 18 drugs, and out of the 18 packages, one was lost in transit, and the rest made it to him. And at that point, he said, wow, this must be a massive operation. But besides that, they had no way to know. I mentioned that Ross grew magic mushrooms before the site launched because he needed to have drugs on it, day one. And at one point, he almost got arrested because his landlord, where he was growing these mushrooms, went into the apartment because there was a flood on the apartment above it and saw his entire grow op and called them and said, the next call I'm making is to the cops. So Ross ran over, removed everything, and got away before the cops showed up. But that was one of his close calls before, the site even existed. Where he supposedly got this idea is from a book called A Lodging of Wayfaring Men. I've never heard of it prior to this, but this novel is about a group of libertarian freedom seekers who create an online internet society and use money that's free from the government. Sounds pretty familiar. Seems like he definitely stole it from that. At one point, Ross planned on opening other sites. He wanted to hold conspiracy. The Armory was one of them, and that one ended up having a front end, but never really launched. A pharma site, Pharma Silk, and other stuff. Pharma Silk was going to be just for prescription drugs that weren't recreationally used. Although the Silk Road carried them at the time, they wanted to separate them. Those sites never ended up launching. Another interesting note was after his girlfriend went to Erica, Julie went to Erica's house and they smoked, and she said, hey, by the way, my boyfriend runs this crazy drug site. Erica got angry at Ross for treating Julie like crap, and so she went to his Facebook wall in the public and said, hey, I'm sure the authorities would like to know about this drug site you're running, which, basically made Ross want to kill himself. He immediately sold all his belongings and moved to Australia for 5 months. But, that was on his wall. I mean, he deleted it, but I'm sure, Mark Zuckerberg knew. And so, all this trivia, all this stuff, I know it's a lot. This was in 2012. The stuff was over by 2014. He was already in prison. So let's look at today. Have criminals learned about Operation Security? It seems to be the downfall. Two really current cases that I thought, really made the point clear. This guy, Roman, aka Track2 Bulba and Nusix, which is Russian for psycho, was one of the biggest players in carding. So this isn't drugs, but this is selling, credit cards. He's a Russian national with powerful political appearance. They knew a lot about him. He was arrested in 2017. I believe he was just sentenced to 27 years. And his pre-arrest evidence included he registered 2 websites. So one of them was called Track2, one of them was called Bulba. And these were the sites he sold his credit cards off of. And he used the personal Yahoo account for that. That personal Yahoo account was also used for his PayPal he used to buy flowers for his wife. That's how they connected him. He also used that Yahoo to purchase his VPS in Virginia that he used as a bounce box and a temporary storage for these credit cards, which they found about 1.8 million credit cards on it. From everything from Home Depot to, Joe and Schmo's, food restaurant. So that's how he was caught. And another really interesting case, another Alpha Bay, which was a replacement to the Silkroad, a much more current one. I mentioned that earlier. This guy, Alex, was arrested because it turns out when you register on the site and the welcome message saying, welcome new user, if you look in the footer of that page, was his personal email account. So I would say no, criminals have not learned. And that's it.